Hi guys, welcome to Signal Path. Today we're doing something pretty fun because we are going to dive deep into the Mercury X from Meris. The Mercury X, if you're watching this channel, I would hazard a strong guess, has been on the wish list for a long time. It has, since it launched, kind of become, I think, a very, very big fish in the ambient pond. Something that is definitely the juggernaut when it comes to feature sets, when it comes to overall design approach. I would say that this is one of the most generous pedal releases I have seen in years in terms of how much they have packed into the Mercury X and similarly into its sort of sibling release, the LVX. But today we're going to cover all of the reverb sounds, all of the modifiers, all of the kind of additional effects that they pack in, and talk about how they function in the ecosystem of the larger kind of reverb engine, but how they break out into their own effects as well. And one thing I find, especially with brands that have broad catalogs of effects, is that often they obscure components, where in here you're going to find filters from the Enzo, you're going to find pitch shifting that has been refined and iterated over several releases, and often brands use pedals like this as an opportunity to dangle a carrot, to sort of say, if you like this, we're going to give you a diet version of it, and you can buy the pedal that's dedicated to this thing if you really want to specialize. But they don't do that with the Mercury X. The Mercury X is sort of like an archive of the best of their effects. It feels very, very generous. It feels very, very comprehensive in a way that I was aware of, but surprised at how full it felt. I think it's one of those things when you get into the pedal, it's expansive, almost overwhelming if you don't know where to start. And the purpose of today's video is not to be an exhaustive reference, because I just don't think I have the level of knowledge necessarily required. There is genuine genius, I think, invested in the design of this pedal, and really what we're going to talk about today is the things that I have access to, the things that feel like central to my workflow as somebody who works in kind of ambient and alt and alt rock and those sorts of things. I think a lot of you will probably resonate with the spaces that I tend to kind of gravitate towards, and so hopefully this is useful to you. But there are tons and tons of resources online. There is tons and tons of content, and I highly recommend bouncing around to kind of different formats and approaches to explaining this thing, because it is expansive, it is massive, it is genuinely one of the densest pedals that I have seen in a very, very long time. There is absolutely no wasted space, and so it's exciting to jump into. It sounds phenomenal. We're gonna dive through all of it. And I'm excited to do this because it's been a long time since I feel like a cornerstone effect has been pushed for me. It's something that this is definitely pushing my expectations of what reverbs can sound like, what reverb pedals should deliver. I think there is some incredible, incredible stuff to be found here. So let's dive into it. But before we do, if this is the kind of content that you enjoy, it would mean a ton to me if you would go ahead and like this video to let YouTube know to recommend this style of content in the future, and subscribe to the channel to follow along. Let's jump into it. All right, let's take a look at the Mercury X. I'm playing my Balaguer Ambient Espada Select into the Cali 76 Stacked Edition to the Mercury X, straight into the Dream and Ruby from UA. It sounds like this. Here's the Mercury X. Let's take it part by part, beginning with Predelay, which is basically the time between an impulse and when the reverb begins. But in the Mercury X, we have options to turn that into almost kind of its own delay pedal. In order to hear this, we'll need to turn the dry blend down, so I'm going to turn that to 0% for the time being, which is basically going to expose the repeats as their own effect. So now when I hit this, you can kind of hear the Predelay acting as its own delay sound. But going over kind of the parameters we have here, we have choice of structure. Right now it's set to reverse, but we can go reverse or standard. So let's move this to standard. Now when I play this, it's going to sound a little bit more like a normal delay. Like a normal delay, we have control over feedback. We have 3 modes: digital, bucket brigade delay, and magnetic, so tape. Bucket brigade mode. And then magnetic. And we have the ability to set separate divisions for the right and left side. So if we wanted to get something real U2, we could do that dotted eighth against quarter thing. On the next page of Predelay, we have crossfeed, which basically tells how much by percentage we're kind of bleeding one channel into the other, left to right and right to left. 0% crossfeed sounds like this. Kind of that standard rhythmic thing. And then with a lot of crossfeed, starts to get a little bit more rhythmic. And then we have half speed, which basically, as it sounds like, kind of adds artifacts, but also kind of slows it down by half. If you're using this as a delay, half speed is a great way to get a little bit more character, a little bit more length out of the pre-delay, which really, I think for many, many people could probably serve as the only delay pedal they really needed. Additionally, we have control over modulation. This can get pretty crazy pretty quick. But even with the crazier settings, it still stays really, really pretty. But for now, I'm going to put the dry blend all the way up to kind of turn this back into a standard reverb, leave crossfeed low, and let's move on to the reverb modes. We've been listening to the Ultra Plate, which is a carryover mode. Sounds like kind of if a plate reverb had a little bit more ambient weight to it, a little bit more kind of diffusion, and it feels like it takes it out of like standard physical spaces and into something that's a little bit beyond that, which I think is really, really pretty for ambient music. Next up we have Cathedra, which is another carryover algorithm. Controls for mod depth and decay sort of help you kind of dial in the kind of space you want to create. this, we can kind of create some crazy pitch effects. Do you want your reverb to feel like it's falling or floating away? So that's all available there. You have kind of standard low and high frequency EQ options to kind of dial things in a little bit further there. Next up we have the spring reverb. Kind of like made for a train beat. The Mercury 7 is definitely known for the ambient stuff. I like that they put the time and effort to make kind of a great spring, and this pairs with tremolo, and we'll look at that in a little bit in the modulation section. But yeah, just great overall, kind of simple but effective spring reverb sound. Next up, we have the 78 room. And I think this is one of the kind of prettiest verbs for like natural sounding stuff. It feels big and diffuse, but it doesn't steal the show. What's nice about this is it has a 3-band EQ that lets us basically really dial in the space we want, pulling out the mids and adding highs. Feels like almost like a tile room, and then reversing that, it feels a little bit warmer and mellower. Next up is the 78 plate. And this is everything like warm, ambient reverb to me. Like this kind of setting because it is so subtle that you almost don't hear it until it's gone, and then it feels empty. So let's try that real quick. Just kind of a nice space filler, and then if we bring up that decay again. We lower the diffusion. This is really where the character, I think, comes out with these modes. Last of the 78 modes, maybe the most, I'd say arguably the most kind of influential, the whole kind of an homage to the granddaddy of ambient reverbs. We're about to get into some of the most wild customization I have ever heard, but I think it's important for us to hear kind of the general character we're building on for these reverbs, because they're quite different, but the subtleties can get lost once we start piling on too many of these effects. But a couple more modes to look at here. Prism kind of creates sort of this really interesting, realistic physical space in your reverb. You have control over size and distance. And if we put everything at the lowest setting, get that kind of comb filtery weirdness that comes from like a very tight like flutter echo in a poorly treated room. But as we start to expand this, it creates this interesting kind of reflective ambience. So if we increase the distance, it almost kind of feels like a multi-head kind of tape echo. And as we increase the size, you can add some modulation. Filter down the highs if we want. Finally, we have gravity. Gravity mode kind of takes your playing and just stretches it into really kind of pretty consistent pad-like feel. With the tilt EQ, we have easy control over how dominant that pad is by tilting kind of downwards. It kind of plays more of a supporting role, where if we kind of tilt it up, it really is the lead voice. Both are really nice, but I think applied differently. What's unique about this mode is we have mod feedback as well as mod depth and speed, which lets us kind of create those crazy ramping textures. Where it'll kind of like devolve into madness. Very fun. For now, we're going to stick with the Ultra Plate as kind of our archetype for all of our kind of additional modifiers and additional sounds that are available in the Mercury X. Jumping over to dynamics, this is everything sort of hold and compression and limiting, but let's jump into it. This is what the sound we're kind of working with for now, but let's add the compressor. Now that we're into kind of our modifiers and additional effects, it's worth noting that all of these have the ability to select where in the processing chain they exist. So for the compressor, we're going to start with post, and this is going to be post reverb, basically everything pre-delay, reverb, modifiers. And then after that, we're going to hit it with a compressor, and that's going to add a little bit of squish and kind of tie together the reverb and the playing a little bit closer. So now, when I'm playing, it kind of pulls out my guitar, but then when I sort of let it decay or just pull my hand off the guitar, it kind of like lifts that reverb a little bit. It kind of creates a lot more consistency overall. Super, super nice for creating kind of cool, I would say more polished reverbs, but if we place this on the pre plus dry, which is the earliest we can, the compressor is going to process our dry tone. So let's mix out the reverb real quick. No reverb. Location is now pre and dry, and now you can hear the compressor is affecting our dry tone. So without it, with it, and you might say, John, why would I want my reverb to do compression? And the reason, I think, is because it actually makes for really great kind of switch hitting slide tones. Often you want multiple levels of compression, I feel, for slide sounds. And if you don't have like a Cali 76 stacked edition, this is something where you can save like a slide preset. Let's kick the reverb back up. So without it, I grab my tone bar from my pedal steel. You know, sounds kind of flat. Then we kick in the second level of compression and reverb. And it just really smooths everything out. Not a masterclass in slide playing by any stretch of the imagination, but you kind of get what I mean. Where you might have something that's like very, very kind of plucky and whatever, and you might just need that extra layer of a nice clean roundness, and I think it does really well at that. You have kind of your standard controls. You have controls for attack and release speed. You have your location controls, compression threshold, and ratio. It works really, really well. Compressor link is the same thing, but using mono analysis. So rather than having your left and right interpreted separately based on their dynamics, if you have something that is particularly stereo, you have the opportunity to link them. Makes sense for certain scenarios. Swell is going to be familiar and I think is incredibly useful. I wish more reverbs had this kind of functionality somewhere in the back, because just kind of some slow gear, kind of auto attack stuff. Easy enough, but super, super nice to have easily on board. And then diffusion, which is kind of, I think, an interesting one, because you can apply this to several places in the chain, including your dry tone. But it's basically just a couple of delay lines that add some softness and blur to what you're playing, or whatever you add it to. If you want that to be in the delay path, or pre or post tank, just add some extra softness. So if we add this post tank, or pre-tank, I should say. I feel like without it, it feels a little bit crisper and brighter, which can be a great thing. But when you have this on, it's diffuse and softening in a way that I find very, very valuable. After that, we have the limiter. Different algorithm than the compressor, but if you want something that's really just kind of like locked at a certain level, level out an uneven performance, you could do that, or you can apply this to the very, very back end of the reverb. Kind of a nice, useful way for kind of keeping things at a reasonable level and consistency. Like if I go full wet here. If you've ever kind of gone that route of like full wet tremolo picking, you've probably experienced something where it's certain notes or sounds can run away, and the limiter is a great way to prevent that. Limiter link, same thing, mono analysis for the limiter algorithm. Freeze, which I think is probably the default if you're not planning on using compression or anything like that, because what this does is allows you to take your playing and freeze it into kind of something that you can play underneath. talk about modifiers, we'll talk about how to basically assign a button to this, but really, really useful for kind of creating ambient moments and kind of special sounds. So those are the dynamics. Let's move to our next section. Preamps are exactly that. A group of preamp sounds that basically allow us to add some sweetness or some grit. First up is a volume pedal. We can use expression or one of the modifiers to basically alter volume and place this post delay, post reverb, or even on kind of just the dry tone to serve as your volume pedal. Really thoughtful, really useful if you kind of want this to be like a semi all-in-one for something like a synth rig or something like that. And then we have tube. I'm gonna apply this to the dry tone first so we can kind of get a feel for what it's doing there, and then we can put it after the reverb. As you can hear, it's adding just a little bit of grit. If we max out the gain, now this is processing the dry tone. If we put this just after the reverb, it turns into this kind of fun shoegaze texture. That's the tube preamp. Next we have the transistor preamp. This one always feels a little bit more hi-fi to me. There's some really cool tone shaping available, whether it's drive or compression. Does so many things that you kind of wouldn't expect from the curb for a reverb pedal to really handle for you. And finally, we have the op-amp preamp. This one feels the weightiest to me. This is kind of the one that I'm the most inclined to leave on, I think. This one sounds great post-reverb as well. Sounds great. Moving on from preamps, we have the filter section, and this is, I think, the biggest bonus for me in the Mercury X, because I absolutely love the Enzo, and the fact that I get to use the filters from that here again, it's just the biggest bonus, and I love that they allow you to use it in the same capacity where it could be just kind of a dry signal filter. But jumping into it, you have a couple different styles of filter, each with their own modes. First up, we have the ladder filter. We're going to apply all of this to the dry signal initially, I think, because it just is the most obvious. But like all the other kind of modifiers, you can place them wherever in the chain. We have low pass, high pass, and band pass for the ladder filter. And spread is a very, very cool control because it allows us to basically offset the left and right cutoff frequencies, and so we can kind of create these really cool side-to-side differences in terms of the filtering. If you're listening on headphones, you'll hear the left and right moving kind of differently as I sweep through this. State variable filter is my favorite. For creating kind of those like cool synthetic textures, I think the resonant low pass mode is one of my favorite setups. And the parametric mode is something that you can use kind of as I think a fixer, as something that's more like an EQ than necessarily a creative effect. At least for my mileage, the state variable is definitely the most kind of heavily used, I think. But just like, you know, a normal kind of parametric filter, you can basically choose a frequency, choose a resonance, and choose your kind of gain to add or subtract wherever kind of is needed. But straightforward enough there. We'll return to this when we talk about modifiers in just a second, but let's jump over to our modulations. First up, we have our chorus. It is so hard to beat that. Backing off the depth and bringing up the speed a little bit. Sounds killer on the dry tone, but if we add this to the pre-tank, just adds a little bit of like brightness and movement to the reverb. Where it's like, it feels chorusy, but somehow subtler than that. Really, really nice. Moving on, we have the vibrato. someone who finds it hard to find great like VB2 style sounds. And so I was just floored when I kind of found this, because I think this has kind of quickly become my favorite of that style of sound. Next we have Valmod. This is kind of a different form of filter. Filters are, I think, a specialty in something, if I'm being entirely honest, I think I am not clever enough always to find ways to apply, but I really like using this pre-reverb. Adds like this really kind of subtle, I would say like lack of cascade. It kind of like cuts off big buildup. We add this full post. Creates almost this like phaser-like sound. Really cool. Next we have tremolo, which I think is one of the biggest treats in the modulation section. And really what we all came here is putting this post on a square wave, obviously, right? So if I max out the reverb, we bring back the mix just a hair. Super cool. And then finally, what I think you probably came to the modulation section for, if you're somebody who subscribes to the channel, the hazy mode does all kind of the disgusting lo-fi you could ever hope for. Let's apply this to the dry signal for just a second. Obliterate is kind of like bit crushing, where the lower the percentage, the more broken it kind of is. Warble is kind of a stochastic, kind of wild vibrato. Age is kind of the crinkly, noisy component. Additionally, we have a mix knob and a highs knob, so if you want to kind of tame the highs or add some back. Super special, but now let's apply that in front of the reverb. Those little artifacts like tuck into the background of the reverb is so special to me. Next, let's look at our pitch options. The first mode is polychroma. This is kind of a very, I think, tight but traditional pitch shifting. It's polychromatic, or polyphonic, I should say. An octave down is just one of my favorite pitch sounds of all time. Let's go full mix and take a look at what's kind of possible here. If you forgot your cello player, add a tiny bit of reverb back. I could get lost there for hours. But this has lots and lots of pitch options. I'm somebody who musically, I would say, sticks to basics. So So octave up, octave down are going to be kind of bread and butter for me. But if we had this before the reverb, pretty nice. After that, we have the micro shift. Kind of that classic 90s thing. You drop the mix down to real subtle. Sounds really nice, and then you can put it kind of post reverb, and it kind of adds a little bit of sparkle too. Kind of reminds me of like some of like the Forever Ago stuff. Create similar kinds of spaces. Then we have the lo-fi. This one allows you to kind of split the left ear and the right ear to your kind of heart's content. Create some pretty crazy reverbs. Finally, mix has basically a couple of trim controls for dry and wet mix in case you need to make fine tuning there. This brings us to modifiers, and I'm going to use the filter section as kind of how we walk through this because there are many options for modifiers, and they all do slightly different things. But we're going to start with an LFO because I believe that's probably the most familiar. Basically, our LFO modifier allows us to take almost any parameter we've looked at so far and turn it into something that kind of moves and ramps and cycles while we're playing. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to our LFO assign and find our filter cutoff. So first, let's set up a filter. We have our filter set up. Now we're going to find cutoff in our LFO assign. now you can hear the LFO, as we adjust it, is going to change the cutoff frequency of our filter. Change the LFO shape, the sine wave. We can do square. We can do a ramp. That start and stop points for how extreme we want the LFO to be. Most importantly, we can set the rate. So that's the simplest setup for a modifier. Let's set up an envelope modifier now. Now the dynamics of my playing, now that we've targeted the cutoff frequency with the envelope piece, I'm now able to trigger the filter with the dynamics of my playing. We add to the attack time. Get a little bit more of like a slow gear kind of style swell. So that's kind of how you set up a modifier. The last modifier I want to take a look at is going to be how we put together our hold modifier to control our freeze. We'll need to set freeze to on. Then set our hold modifier to dynamics freeze. Set our kind of hold style to be latching. Hold min to 0, hold max to 100. And now from kind of our main 4 buttons, we're able to remotely trigger that freeze. Super cool. If we want that to be something that is momentary, we can change it to momentary. If we set this to pre and dry, that's probably going to be the least jarring experience for the decay. Now it'll hold, but then when I let go, a little bit more subtle decay. Let's add some reverb here. that's really top to bottom the functionality of the Mercury X. You're going to be seeing much more of this in other demos, just as kind of the house reverb. I've really been enjoying this for ambient stuff. I've got some freeform content that I think will find its way out over the next few months, but excited to kind of have this as a writing tool, as something to break me out of some of the boxes that I think I have mentally been in around what reverb can and should do. But I've been having fun, and this has really been a very exciting creative tool to implement. So thanks for watching. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you in the next one.